Hey, welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I am Vincent Hill, of course, recovering Roy Oliver and Shayna Hubers. But before we get into that, those great trials, let's take a look at the top crime stories of the day.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. A GoFundMe page set up to raise money for a man who punched a sex offender during a sentencing hearing has reportedly raised more than $3,500 towards his legal defense fund. 45-year-old Kevin Patrick Smith was arrested after he punched defendant Donald Courtney Biggs, who was convicted for illegally filming dozens of young victims showering, undressing, and using the bathroom. Smith, a father of two of the victims, faces charges of obstructing governmental or judicial administration, fourth-degree assault, and disorderly conduct. 3 suspects in Indianapolis are facing charges after reportedly robbing and killing a Papa John's delivery driver before taking the pizza he was delivering home to eat. The suspects, 18-year-old Jawan Terry, 18-year-old Jason Epierds, and 19-year-old Jason Dale, are accused of luring 24-year-old Lavon Drake to a vacant rental house where they allegedly robbed and killed the Papa John's driver. Police were able to track the suspects to a nearby apartment complex where they reportedly went home to eat the pizza. The suspects face charges of murder and robbery. An officer in Houston is seen on bystander footage begging a security guard to stop filming and help him subdue a robbery suspect. The unidentified officer can be seen desperately trying to subdue 17-year-old Devon Miller while witnesses filmed the incident.
How you doing that? Why you do that? Why did you do that? Stop grabbing my gun! Oh my God! I gave his gun!
The unidentified security guard was fired once the video went viral. Miller now faces a charge of disarming a police officer. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Hey, thank you so much for that, Anthony. Joining me in studio is Brad Micklin, and via Skype all the way from Chicago is Jennifer Schuster. They're both trial attorneys. And I want to talk about that story we just saw about the officer that was struggling there with that individual there. Listen, we've all seen these videos. It's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. Me being a former officer, there's nothing more that would upset me if I'm struggling with someone, he's going for my gun, and everyone's just sitting there videotaping. And the part that really disgusts me, it looked like there was a security guard there who was actually videotaping this as well. Brad, I'll toss to you first. What are your thoughts on that?
It's actually appalling. When you see the video with sound, the person recording, which I think is a security officer, is saying something along the lines of, he's not going to kill you, he's not going to kill you, we have it on tape, which suggests that they're taping it to protect the alleged criminal and not the police officer. And it's just amazing what people are going to be doing outside now.
Well, Jennifer, I want to bring up what Brad just said. He's not going to kill you. This is what the security guard was saying. But you could also hear someone taping saying he's reaching for his gun. So at that point, that is a situation of deadly force where the officer could have used deadly force if need be. What say you?
I agree with you, Vincent, and it's unbelievable that this woman is a security guard. Her job is to lend a hand and keep people safe.
Right.
And what does she do? She stands by and does nothing except takes out her phone and records it. It's unbelievable. And I was reading about this online, and my understanding is that the security guard did lose her job.
Well, I think she should have lost her job because, again, like you said, part of being a security guard is to assist, especially those in law enforcement. I mean, you know, this guy was actively resisting arrest. He's going for the officer's gun, and she does nothing but record it so she can get her 15 minutes of fame. You can see it there on your screen. She's standing back behind the police car just filming this. You know, that's just bad. If we're at that point in this country where all we're concerned about is videotaping this so we can post it on social media, we have a huge problem. I want to switch gears. Of course, we've been covering the Shayna Hubers case in Kentucky. Again, she was previously convicted of the murder of her former boyfriend and lover. She shot him 6 times, once in the face. We've been listening to testimony all day. So let's get back into the courtroom and hear some of her testimony from Shayna Hubers herself.
Tell, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what the first communications were like.
I walked towards him on the back porch where he was sitting in a chair on the back porch, and I asked him how his day was, and I asked him about, you know, the lawsuit, because I knew that he had said that the lawsuit would be
Overruled. Go ahead. Go ahead.
would be finalized around this time, or that he was still in proceedings for it. And he said that he didn't want to talk about it. He seemed angry, and he brought up the fact that my mother had been up there in the condo that day, and he made it very clear that he didn't like the fact that my mother was in the condominium that day. And he basically made it clear that he was upset about that. He called me a crybaby for having my mother come when I'm an adult, or when I was an adult. He was upset that I had her there, and that he didn't expect it. He started downing my mother. I guess he had seen her that morning at the condo, and he started downing her. He was calling my mother names, making fun of her appearance. He called my mother a fat whore. He made fun of the fact that my mother was a public school teacher. Ryan went to private schools, and he always believed that public school was less than or bad. He had something against public school teachers. He said she was stupid, and that she was crazy, and that my parents were crazy because they were so religious. And he made fun of me for being from less money than he was from, and he made fun of my upbringing and my background, and said that my family were stupid hillbillies from the mountains and not good enough, that we weren't worth anything. He made fun of what I was going to school for at the time. I was getting my master's in education, and he basically said, "You're not going to be anything better than your mother."
When you sent Mr. Poston a message as to your plans for getting your things, did you then go and return to the condominium?
Yes.
And did you ever go back to Kenwood Mall after that?
No.
Did you expect Mr. Poston to be at the condominium when you returned?
I didn't know if he'd be there or not.
Okay. And when you got there, just tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what happened.
Okay. When I arrived at the condominium, Ryan was standing at the foot of the dining room table, between the dining room table and the back porch, and he was walking back and forth between the dining room table and the back porch, pacing and smoking cigarettes. He smoked often, and he seemed, as I perceived it, to be in a bad mood. That's my perception.
Wow, that is some very strange testimony there from Shayna Hubers. Now, listen, growing up, I played your mama jokes all the time. You heard testimony that he called her mom fat, and another word. I'm not going to repeat that out of respect for women. But, you know, I'm still not seeing motive here in this case to shoot this man 6 times, once in the face. Jennifer, I will go to you. I mean, that testimony right there is not lining up with any type of motive.
I agree with you. I think she's trying to paint a picture of Ryan Poston that's not favorable, obviously, saying that he said lots of disparaging things about her and her family. We know from opening statements, the prosecutors, or rather the defense, said that she comes from a religious, a strict background, modest means. Ryan Poston comes from an affluent family. And she's trying to make that point that he really thought he was superior. She's throwing in things like he smokes and he just was a bad guy. Is it enough? Is it really compelling to show that he was an abuser? At this point, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. And Brad, let me ask you this. It appears that she's trying to paint this picture that he was just this overall bad guy to start leading credence to, yes, he was an abuser, not only mentally but physically.
Yeah, and it's very challenging because it's difficult for people to separate domestic violence victims and people who just use it as an excuse,
right,
because there are millions that are victims, millions that know people that are victims. So it's always a very compelling defense. But in this case, it still doesn't justify shooting him 6 times when after the first one, you knew he was alive. She could have left and called 911.
Right.
She didn't.
Right. And listen, I hate smokers, really. Like, she mentioned how bad of a smoker he was. I hate people talking about my mom, but I just, I don't see where we're actually there to where she could say, yes, I want to shoot him once. He falls down. Oh, I feel bad, so I want to shoot him 5 more times to make sure he's dead. This testimony is mind-boggling, to say the least. I consider her Jodi Arias Jr., in my opinion. We are actually going to take a quick break. Of course, we'll have more testimony from Shayna Hubers. Again, she is on trial again for the murder of her boyfriend. She is previously convicted. You don't want to go away. More to come from this odd testimony from Shayna Hubers at the end of this break. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. We're still hearing testimony from Shayna Hubers. Again, this is some very odd testimony. She was previously convicted for killing her boyfriend. She shot him 6 times, once in the face. Let's listen to more of her testimony.
Talking about what occurred at the door to the bedroom. Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what occurred at the door to the bedroom that night. Please.
I started to walk towards Ryan, and through the door, he was standing in the way, and I just wanted to get my purse and my keys, which were a few steps behind him, on the floor. And he completely startled me when he just grabbed onto me. He just grabbed onto my body, onto my person, with both hands as I was trying to get in the door to get my purse and my keys. And we started to wrestle. And I remember that this went from the door to the bed, and I grabbed on to the bed. I grabbed on just to have something to grab onto, and I remember grabbing onto the comforter, and it didn't help me any. I just jerked the comforters off the bed, and I was trying to get down on the floor to get my purse and my keys, and he reached down and grabbed my purse and my keys and threw them into the other room. And he picked me up by the back of my bra and my pants, the trousers of my pants, and he picked me up from an awkward angle and threw me from the doorway of his bedroom into the other room, all the way to the edge of the short sofa. And I had never experienced something like that before in my life. He threw me many feet across the room, and I landed on the carpet at the foot of the sofa.
Okay. And what happened next?
I turned and looked at him, and he was running towards me. He grabbed me again, and he picked me up in a similar way again, and he started carrying me. And I believed because of the direction he was moving, that he was trying to carry me out of the house, as he had done before earlier in that year. And when he was trying to carry me, I guess I was kicking, and he fell on me. I don't believe he meant to. And he fell on top of me onto an area between the sofa and onto the footstool. My chest, this part of my body, was on the footstool, and all of Ryan's weight was behind me on the footstool. And he had all of his weight on top of me, and he laid on me in that position for what felt like a while. I'm not sure how long it was. And he had one hand in I had my hair in like a messy bun, and he had one hand up in my ponytail, up in my bun like this. And he was screaming in my left ear. So his body was kind of behind me and to my left. He was screaming in my left ear.
You remember anything he was saying?
Yes, I do.
What was he saying?
He screamed at me, "You're a fucked up person. And you're a fucked up person because you were touched when you were a little girl. And that's why you can't orgasm, and that's why I can't love you, and that's why no one will ever be able to love you."
Okay, we're still hearing testimony from Shayna Hubers here. Still with me in studio, Brad Micklin, and via Skype, Jennifer Schuster. Jennifer, I want to go to you first on this. Listen, I'm not saying domestic violence does not happen. I've worked enough domestic violence cases as a police officer, but I have a few problems here. It sounds like there is plenty of opportunity for her to leave without the shooting happening. And I have yet to hear testimony. I heard she got tossed around on the couch. I hear all of this. He was on top of her with all of her weight. I assure you she would have bruised at some point somewhere in her body if there was that much physicality here. And I haven't heard that testimony. I haven't seen the evidence. So to me, it doesn't sound like there was a physical domestic dispute going on that day.
You're right, Vincent. I don't think that evidence exists. When she was taken to the police department, they did take photos of her, and I believe there are some photos of some faint bruising. But like you said, if she's being thrown around this condo, if this man is laying on top of this woman for what she says was quite a while, surely there would be some bruises, certainly more than what we've seen in the police photographs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brad, like I said before, I think she had plenty of opportunity. And I don't want to get into a debate of duty to retreat and all this other stuff, but I think she had plenty of opportunity, if that was going on, to step back, call 911, leave the house, get to safety. Why shoot this man once, let him get down on the ground and say, "Oh, I felt sorry, so I'm going to shoot him 5 more times," and once in the head?
I agree. I agree with you and with Jennifer. I think even if we put aside this whole domestic violence issue, just look at her demeanor, her body language. You know, most victims of serious domestic violence don't have a very powerful stance when they're on trial. They're usually, for lack of better words, meek and afraid, which is understandable because of what they've gone through. Here we have a witness who's standing up straight. She's got her eye right to the jury, and her recollection is far too precise for things that at the time that they were occurring were not so meaningful as they are now. But yet she remembers everything that happened, everything that she heard, everything that she felt. It's just not believable.
Yeah, and Jennifer, to Brad's point, you could see there during that testimony, she keeps eyeing the jury, like, with confidence. She keeps turning her eye to the jury, almost like she's been coached to, oh, look at the jury, make sure they see her. See, she's cutting her eyes right there to the jury. Make sure the jury sees you. Yeah, to me, it just looks coached. What say you?
I agree. I work with a lot of victims of domestic violence, and it's absolutely true that their demeanor is very different from what we're seeing with Shayna Hubers. Of course, there's no one-size-fits-all look or demeanor to these folks, but I would say that the way she's acting confidently with direct eye contact, it's not consistent with what we usually see when there's a true instance of domestic violence.
Yeah, and I would expect a witness that's a true victim. And again, I'm not taking away that domestic violence does not occur. I just think their confidence level would be a little less than what we saw there from Shayna Hubers. And, you know, it was almost like she was just painting her boyfriend to be this horrible guy. Of course, that's what we would expect here as part of her defense. But it was almost just, I don't know, too coached, in my opinion. Let's hear more of her testimony.
What do you remember about what happened next?
There's a few moments there where I don't have any recollection. I don't remember how or how much longer it was, but next thing I know, I wound up sitting on my bottom with my knees up under. I was sitting kind of near the dining room table, and Ryan was standing over top of me.
What side of the dining room table?
Opposite of the wall.
Okay. What do you recall happened next? Were you aware there was a gun on the table?
Yes. I remember trying to stand up where I was sitting on the floor, and Ryan pushed me back down by my chest. He put his hand on my chest and pushed me back down onto the floor. And I was crying, and I was hysterically crying, and I recall Ryan standing over me and grabbing the gun that was sitting on the table and pointing it at me and saying, "I could just kill you right now and get away with it. Nobody would even know."
How did you react to that?
I was shocked. I was afraid. I didn't understand what I had done to deserve any of this.
Did you get up from the floor at that point?
No, not yet.
Okay. Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what happened.
He set the gun back down on the table, and he walked around the table, and he was still talking, and he was still saying hurtful things. I don't remember exactly what. And he sat down in his chair for a brief moment, and he was standing up from the chair, and he was reaching across the table, and I don't know if he was reaching for the gun or reaching for me, but I was still sitting on the floor at this point in time, and I got up off the floor, and I grabbed the gun, and I shot him.
Okay, so there's some more testimony from Shayna Hubers. Now, she says her words that her boyfriend, Ryan, said, "I could just kill you right now and get away with it, and nobody would ever know." So I assume she's trying to paint the imminent threat against her life based on that statement. Jennifer, I'll go to you first. Do you think, based on that statement, of course, this is her words, he's not here to tell that story, do you think based on that, that's enough to say she was in imminent danger of her life?
I mean, that's provided we believe that he actually said it. When you consider that statement, though, in the totality of the circumstances, including this witness's demeanor, the fact that she's saying she was hysterically crying, the fact that she says that he was throwing her around and she was fearful of her life, but yet she's expressing no fear and no emotion, really, as she's saying these things. So I think when you consider all of those things together, it doesn't seem like there was this true reasonable belief that she feared for her life and there was this necessity to use force.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to articulate just based on, you know, someone saying, "I'm going to kill you and I can get away with it," that there's that imminent threat against their life. Because even if the story's true about her being tossed onto the couch, I'm still not quite there yet, that there is this imminent threat against her life. We're actually going to take a quick break. We have much more to come from this trial. Of course, we're still covering the Roy Oliver case as well. We will have someone live from the courtroom to give us an update on that trial here in just a little bit. Here on the Law and Crime Network, you don't want to go away. Much more to come. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Just before the break, we heard more testimony from Shayna Hubers. Again, you can see her there on your screen. She is previously convicted of shooting her boyfriend, Ryan, 6 times, once in the face. We heard her testimony. We heard what led up to the shooting according to her. But now let's hear from Doris West. She's actually a neighbor of Ryan in this case. Let's listen to her testimony. And she talks about hearing the shots. Take a listen.
What happened next? Let me see. That's right.
Do you remember in relation to the shots?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, yes. She hadn't been in there but just a few seconds, and heard 2 shots. And in the beginning, I thought they were firecrackers, but later they were not. And then there was 4 more shots, like boom, 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 boom. That's the way I heard them.
All right. And so this individual went in, you heard a chair scrape, and then a few seconds later you heard what you thought were firecrackers at first.
Yes, twice. I thought it was firecrackers, yes.
And do you know how long between the 2 and the 4 shots? If you know.
Maybe 6 seconds.
Okay, all right. Now, before the shots, did you hear any yelling or screaming or anything like that?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay. And you'd been living there a while. Mr. Poston had already been living there. Had you heard any yelling or screaming coming from above you in that apartment when he was there?
No.
All right. And are you and Mr. West retired?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. And so would you be home? Sounds like you do go out, but would you be home a lot? Or?
Home a lot.
Okay.
Old people don't go out much.
And did you hear anything after the shots?
Yes, we heard a loud thump on the ceiling, and like someone falling, and that's what I heard, all I heard at that time.
Okay, all right. And then eventually the police showed up after that?
Oh, yes. The sirens and all that, and the police coming, yes.
Okay. Now, had you ever heard anything before coming from above on the 3rd floor? I know you said there was no yelling or screaming or noise or anything.
Never, no.
All right. And you said it was maybe weeping that night. Had you ever heard weeping before?
You're talking Friday night now?
No, before Friday night.
Before Friday. Yes, ma'am. On Thursday night, someone was on the deck weeping, not loud, just weeping softly, crying softly. And then also got up and went into the, and her voice, and their voice come out and said, "It's okay, it's okay." It's only 2 things I heard Mr. say.
Okay, so that was the night before.
That was Thursday night.
That was Thursday night, okay. But you didn't hear any yelling or screaming or anything else?
No.
All right, okay.
Okay, so there we just heard from a neighbor of Ryan Poston in this case. Again, he was shot by the defendant in this case, Shayna Hubers, 6 times, once in the face. We just heard some very interesting testimony. Still with me, Brad Micklin and Jennifer Schuster out in Chicago via Skype. Brad, I'll go to you first. So you just heard what she said. Look, old people don't go out a lot, right? So she's home. She said absolutely not when she was asked, did you hear screaming inside that apartment? And she also said she never heard screaming. So it goes back to what I said. How do we know this domestic violence occurred? And how do we know Shayna's just not using this to say, oh, I'm a victim in this case. He was abusive. He was this. But if what her story is, what she says is true, you would assume the neighbor would hear this screaming. But the only thing she heard was this loud thump, which she assumed was someone falling on the floor. And obviously, that was probably Ryan falling on the floor.
Yeah, I think this witness adds a very interesting element to the case, because normally with a domestic violence relationship, there aren't a lot of witnesses. It's an intimate setting. It's at home when nobody's around. Here we have a witness who not only says, I didn't hear any screaming before the shooting, but I have to assume if she could hear noise from the apartment, she would have heard other instances, other fights, other thumping. And I don't think we're going to hear any of that from this witness or anybody else that the defendant may call.
Yeah, and Jennifer, out to you. So one thing I picked up on this testimony, she heard 2 shots. There was a few seconds delay, and then she heard 4 other shots. So, again, does that mean she was just this vindictive, jealous person? Or was she in fear of her life? There's 2 shots. There's this delay. There's a few second delay. Again, you know, you're shot twice. Usually the fight is out of you. And according to Shayna herself, she stood over him and fired the other shots because she felt sorry or whatever. You know, so again, does that mean that there is this imminent threat, or is she just this vindictive person who was jealous about him dating this other woman?
Yeah, you know, I think there are lots of inferences we can draw when we hear about there being a delay between gunshots. In this instance, we know that she testified that she felt like she had to finish him off and that she was still in fear for her life, even up to the last minute, the last final deadly blow. But given the testimony of this witness, this very seemingly credible witness, it doesn't sound like there was any signs of a struggle. If this was a life and death struggle, it's believable that this neighbor who's in close proximity of this condo surely would have heard something other than just the gunshots, and she's saying he did not.
Absolutely. We're going to have more of this interesting case when we come back after this break here on the Law&Crime Network. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. We've been listening to the testimony in this Shayna Huber's case. Again, she's on trial again for the murder of her boyfriend, who she shot 6 times. You can see her there on your screen. She shot him once in the face. We heard previous testimony from a neighbor who said she heard no arguing or anything like that just before the shooting. She heard a pause. She heard 2 shots, then a pause, and then 4 more shots. She heard something that sounded like a thump, like someone falling to the ground. We can assume that was Ryan in this case. So now we actually want to hear testimony from Holly Nevin. She's actually the defendant, Shayna Huber's former cellmate. Let's take a listen to what she has to say.
On the night of October 12, 2012, when did Ms. Hubers tell you she learned that Ryan Poston was leaving her or wanted her out?
It was early. It was before she had got back to the condo.
Before she arrived at the condo, she was aware of that?
Yeah.
And how had she become aware of it?
Because she was talking to Ryan on a cell phone.
On the phone. And when did Ms. Hubers tell you when she arrived back at Highland Meadows where Mr. Poston was or what he was doing?
He was on the back porch or patio or deck.
And what was he doing out there?
Smoking a cigarette.
All right. And with Mr. Poston, have you ever been to the Highland Meadows condominiums?
Never.
Do you have any way of knowing if they even have porches or decks outside from what Ms. Hubers told you?
No.
Is everything you know about the Highland Meadows condominium, specifically Mr. Poston's, from the defendant?
Correct.
Okay. And what did she tell you that while Mr. Poston was out, she arrived and he's outside smoking on the deck? What did she tell you she did?
She went to the back porch.
For what purpose?
To talk to him, to try to... She said that she was trying to push his buttons to try to get a reaction from him, to get him to get loud by talking about a case that he had had.
And what was the purpose for her to try to get loud, or try to make him get loud?
So somebody would hear that he was yelling at her.
And with her there trying to provoke him, did she tell you what Mr. Poston did?
I can't remember.
Okay. Did he remain there on the porch with her?
No, he went inside.
And where did he go?
I believe he went to his bedroom and locked himself in his room.
And did she tell you why he went to his bedroom and locked the door?
because he did not want to fight with her.
And why wouldn't Mr. Poston just leave his condo?
I don't know.
Oh, wait a minute. So that's a little different than what Shayna's been saying. Now, according to this witness who was her cellmate, Ryan actually went into his room and locked the door. So again, where was the imminent threat to say that she was in fear of her life to shoot him 6 times? Jennifer, what do you think about that? I mean, he's locked himself in the bedroom to get away from her. So where's this imminent threat?
Pretty hard to argue that there is one when you've got this so-called abuser who's the one who's running away and locking himself behind closed doors. So I agree with you that it doesn't appear that there is this imminent threat. The question is this witness credible? We know that she is a jailhouse snitch, for lack of a better word. So it will be interesting to see on cross what the defense raises about this witness.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Jennifer's point, Brad, jailhouse snitch testimony is always that, yeah, maybe you're trying to get something out of this for your testimony. So we don't know if it's reliable, but I will add the fact that the neighbor said she didn't hear any screaming. She never heard any screaming. So maybe this testimony is true that, you know, Shayna made this whole thing up to make herself look like a victim.
It's interesting, and I'm not really sure where it's all going to go yet, but remember, she was already convicted. So she was making these statements probably thinking she had very little to lose.
Right.
And she may have even been upset with either the system or her conviction. So there might be a lot more coming. So whether or not this witness is getting favorable sentencing or parole recommendations may still not change the fact that Shayna may have said a lot more to not only this witness and possibly others that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And we heard testimony, too, from some of Ryan's friends who said she was basically stalking him, following him around, coming to the office, showing up with just brown paper bag lunches, you know, just out of the blue after he had broken up with her. So I think there's a lot more to this story. Let's get back in the courtroom and hear more testimony from Holly Nivens.
How he was when she first shot him?
At the kitchen table.
According to the shooters, did he remain at the kitchen table for all the shots?
Yes.
At any point, did he fall?
He fell to the ground.
And what did she do at that point?
Went around to the opposite side and shot him.
While he was on the ground?
Yeah.
Ms. Hubers told you that Ryan Poston was ending their relationship on October 12, 2012. Did she make any comments to you about her view towards that or her actions towards that?
Yes.
What was that?
She had said that Ryan's family had a bunch of money and that they could buy a new child.
I'm sorry, can you please say into the mic so they get you?
That Ryan's family had a bunch of money and that they could buy a new child.
After the shooting, did Ms. Hubers tell you what she did after shooting Ryan Poston?
Yes.
Can you please tell the jury?
She had called her mom.
And what, is that the first thing she did, or had she taken other actions prior to that?
She said that she had was trying to clean up the apartment.
Okay. I want to ask you specifically, you said she was trying to clean up. Were there specific items that Ms. Hubers was dealing with when trying to clean up?
Yes.
Please, remember the mic. And what were those?
The gun.
What did she tell you that she had done with the gun after the shooting?
That she had wiped the prints off and put it in her purse.
And why was she putting the gun in her purse?
Because she had a conversation with her mom, and her mom said that she wanted to meet her, potentially.
And do what with it?
I'm sorry. Again, ma'am, you're going to have to speak.
I'm sorry.
I apologize for keep asking you to speak, but you're going to have to for the record. And if you need to get closer to that mic,
okay.
You can get.
I apologize.
And you had said that they were potentially going to meet and do what with? What was the purpose of them meeting, she and her mother?
Well, they had phone conversation. On the phone conversation, she had said that they were going to try to make it seem like it was a suicide, or that they were going to, take the gun and come back, either that following Sunday or Monday and make it seem like they had just found Ryan's body there.
Did Ms. Hubers originally told you that she had killed Ryan Poston out of self-defense. Did she tell you or give you any ideas where the idea for a self-defense claim would have come from?
She said that Ryan was abusing her.
Did she tell you if she was aware of anyone else who had had a successful self-defense claim?
Yes.
And can you please tell us about that?
She had said that her mom was in a situation like that. One of her employees at the school that she worked at, she had beat a self-defense claim that she had shot somebody and got away with it.
Did she discuss that? According to Ms. Hubers, did they discuss that on the phone that night?
I believe so.
Ms. Nivens, to your knowledge, or according to what you heard from Ms. Hubers, had Shayna talked to her mother on other times on October 12, 2012, besides after shooting Ryan Poston?
Yes.
Had she seen her mother that day?
Yes.
What did she tell you about that?
That I believe that they were at Ryan's parents' house the night before and they had drank too much and she wanted her mom to come stay with her and sleep with her. And they woke up and they went shopping. But she said that her mom had prayed with her, saying that to remove Ryan from Shayna's life, in life and in death.
Removed Ryan from Shayna's life.
Objection, Your Honor. Sustained.
Can you please say into the microphone so the record gets you what their prayer was that day?
Objection, Your
She
Honor.
said
Yes,
it. Objection sustained.
Okay, that was more testimony from Holly Nevins. She testified about Shayna actually calling her mom before calling 911, and we know there was about a 10 to 15 minute lapse before she actually called 911, and she started saying some pretty interesting things here, again, that take away this whole self-defense claim, that she actually cleaned the gun, and then there was this scheme to actually leave Ryan's body in the apartment for several days, and she was just going to come home and say, oh, I found him shot over the weekend, you know, so that, again, it takes away this whole self-defense claim if this testimony is true. Now, to be fair, this is a jailhouse witness, a jailhouse snitch. Still with me in the studio, Brad Micklin, and still with me via Skype, Jennifer Schuster. Jennifer, of course, I will start with you as the lady in this case. What do you think about that testimony? I think it's pretty compelling, you know, especially this whole scheme that she was going to leave the body there for several days and just make it look like she came home and just found Ryan there on the floor and she was, you know, out of town or at her parents or something like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think especially given that there was this delay between the time the incident occurred and her actually calling 911. And we know that she called her mom. I believe that Shayna actually admits to that herself. So this is consistent with Shayna Huber's testimony herself. Right. Also, Shayna's testified that Ryan came from a wealthy family. This witness is also testifying that Shayna said things to her to that effect.
Right.
So far, her testimony seems to be aligning with what Shayna herself has been saying.
Right. Brad, let me ask you this. From a defense standpoint, if you're a defense attorney in this case, how do you even defend the actions of not calling 911 for 10 to 15 minutes? It's one thing if there's a few second delay, maybe 5-minute delay, because this just happened so fast. But at some point in your head, you should say, you know what? This guy's dead on the floor. He's dying on the floor. I need to call 911 and get them here.
It's an important piece, and if you're this defense attorney, you have a brutal case to begin with.
Right.
But her own admissions in the 911 tape was she called her mother first. So she knew she did something wrong.
Right.
She wouldn't have called anybody. She would have just picked up and left. She didn't. She called her mother. I think her mother said, well, you shot him in self-defense. So then she calls 911, Shayna, and says, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense. It sounded very contrived when she called 911. So there's almost no way to get around the point that she waited 15 minutes.
Right.
Even though, and he might have still lived, unlikely. But still a 15-minute delay that he sat there bleeding.
Right. And you know what? I think if something like that just happened, the last thing out of your mouth is going to be, I shot my boyfriend in self-defense. I've listened to so many 911 calls, and it usually doesn't start out like that. But, you know, every situation is a little different. I got to tell you, though, listening to this case makes me think I need to stay single for the rest of my life because, wow, if I say someone is bad, I may get shot 6 times, you know. We're going to have more of this case when we come back here on the other side of this break. I assure you, you don't want to go away. So much more interesting testimony from this case. Again, Shayna Huberts shot her boyfriend 6 times, once in the face. We'll be right back here on the Law and Crime Network. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Still hearing testimony in this Shayna Huberts case. Of course, she is on trial again for the murder of her boyfriend. She shot him 6 times. She's claiming self-defense. You can see her there on your screen. We've been hearing testimony from a neighbor of the victim in this case. We also heard testimony from a jailhouse snitch in this case, her former cellmate. So now we actually want to hear testimony from Officer Bill Birkenhauer. He's actually the police chief there in Highland Heights, Kentucky. Take a listen.
I want to ask you specifically about what the defendant said about the victim's position, Mr. Poston's position at the time he was first shot. As an investigator, can you tell me the importance of what's been marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit number 130? I'm going out of order. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yes. By the time I arrived at the crime scene, I'd already, like I said, observed some of Ms. Hubert's statements, and I'd already also talked to the officers that were present. The statement about her standing on one side of the table and shooting Mr. Poston from across the table as he was seated at the kitchen table, or I believe she said he was seated or starting to stand up. That is important for this picture here because, as you can see, Mr. Poston's legs are slightly bent, extended out in front of him, which would be underneath the table, and his feet appear to be crossed. Based off of the positioning of Mr. Poston's body there, it's obvious that he was sitting because if your feet are extended in front of you underneath the table, you can't start to stand up. When you start to stand up, you pull your feet back up under you or put them underneath you as you start to stand up. Based on this picture, it's clear, again, he was sitting, legs extended at the chair.
I'm going to show you now what's been marked. Go back to 129. Does this also show a different angle of that or a different version of that?
Yes, it is a different angle, again, with the slightly bent legs and feet extended under the table. Yes, I can. That's the living room area, both TVs and the love seat in the picture, chair in the middle of the living room floor, and footstool.
And can you explain to the jury the importance of this photograph from your investigative perspective?
Well, a couple things. One, you can start to see the clutter and the stuff in the living room with the chairs in the middle of the floor and the footstool and things of that nature. Both TVs are on. Both TVs are in place. The one TV.
What does that mean, in place?
These are not knocked over on the floor, knocked over, pushed against the wall, damaged in any way. These TVs also were pretty much covered in dust. So it's obvious that nobody even brushed up against the TVs because there would have been streaks from the dust on the screens and the sides.
And there was no dust disturbed?
No, there was not.
Again, just another outline picture, 132, a little further away. I'm not sure if we've had this one in the record yet. What's important is from your investigation with this photograph?
Again, just the amount of things in the middle of the living room floor. You have a coffee table, a chair, an exercise bike, the couches, the statement about being thrown from or pushed from the bedroom to the front door or thrown, or there was quite a few statements. This indicates, based off of the amount of items in the middle of the living room floor and nothing being disturbed. I think you can see the coffee table. There's quite a few items on there that obviously have not been disturbed. there does not appear that there could have possibly been any kind of struggle in the middle of that living room.
We talked a little bit about the table where Ryan was sitting.
Yes.
What'd you notice about the table?
Well, the first thing about the table was the amount of items laying on the table. There was pretty much something covering the whole table. That was important because of the statement about the gun sitting on the table and that she reached it or grabbed it out of his hand or he was trying to reach across the table to get the gun. There couldn't have possibly been any type of struggle there. Again, based off of the location of Mr. Poston's body, he was clearly sitting. In fact, he was sitting away from the table somewhat. Had there been any type of struggle or even if he'd been reaching across the table when he was shot, the body would have landed on the table, disturbing some of the items sitting there, which none of that was.
Okay, so what's that old saying, a dead man tells no lie? Well, guess what doesn't lie? The evidence. Now remember, Shayna Huber said that she was thrown around, she was tossed around, but you just heard that testimony from the police chief in this case. He says even the TV had dust on it. There was nothing disturbed, so there was nothing to suggest that this whole physical altercation that she said and her whole defense has been based on even happened. Jennifer, that is very, very compelling testimony from this police chief.
It is. And I was going to say, I know there's a good reason I don't dust all that often, preserving evidence. In all seriousness, and of course this is very serious, yeah, certainly things would have been moved around in this place. The dust would have been off the television. The televisions themselves would have been out of place, and it just didn't exist in this instance. Also, very compelling the fact that all evidence points to the fact that Ryan was sitting at this table.
Right.
The so-called aggressor was sitting at the time he was shot by Shayna Hubers. So it's hard to rationalize that there was, in fact, this imminent threat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you used the word aggressor, Brian. I'll go to you. Brad, I'll go to you. She's claiming he's this primary aggressor in this whole domestic disturbance. But the evidence suggests he was not only seated, but even further back. So even if the gun was on the table like she claimed, he wasn't even in arm's length of it, according to this chief.
That's what's fascinating about this testimony, because I was wondering on the break when I heard about this witness that I was wondering what's the police chief going to really offer in this kind of case. It's obvious she shot him 6 times, but to find out that there was no sign of struggle whatsoever blows her whole defense that he was this violent man who needed to be shot 6 times clearly out of the water.
Yeah, and you would assume that maybe she would change her story in this case at some point, but she's stuck to her guns, no pun intended, the entire time that this was a violent struggle inside that apartment. But we've heard testimony from a previous neighbor who says she heard no screaming. We heard testimony from her former cellmate who says she concocted this story that she was going to leave Ryan in the apartment for several days and come home and say, oh, I found him like this. We just heard testimony from this police chief that said, hey, the evidence just doesn't match up to what she's saying happened inside that apartment. So, you know, where are we at in this case? Was it a violent altercation between the two, or was it this jealous female that had stalked her boyfriend? We heard testimony about that, but it's up to the jury to decide. But let's hear testimony from Shayna Hubers herself during her police interview. Take a listen.
Screaming all these things. When I went to take out my things out of his room, he said, can you hurry? Can you get out of here sooner? And he was sitting at the table playing with ammunition or whatever it was he was playing with, glaring at me across the room as I was getting the stuff ready. And then that's when he stood up and was like, can you move it on a little faster? And he picked me up to move me on faster because I was getting my things ready. And I didn't have clothes on when I killed him. I killed him off naked. And then I put my clothes on to call the cops because I didn't want him to come get me naked. I think I just had this on. So don't wonder. I think I had this on. I'm guessing. In the underwear. But I put on my jacket and my shoes. So I was like getting dressed. get me out of here. Yeah. I was getting out. My things were packed in his house. Yeah. Like there's bags that are packed and sitting in his house. I was ready to be out of there. Right. My mother even helped me back. Be done with him, Shayna. Be done with him. You know? Be done with him, he's evil. And I'm not a malicious person. Like, I'm not somebody who's ever done this. Like, anyone that knows me, like, any character, because even his own family would say I'm a nice, good person. They can't say that thing about me. They're trying to think of me. I'm scared that they obviously live in me now. I'm going to have a friend there. I can hate you, even though when I shot him in the face, he had put his arm across the table, and there's a lamp, and he had put his arm across the table and had it in my face and was screaming at me at the top of his lungs after he had turned me around the room, and was saying emotionally to me, I fucking hate you. I hate your fucking Eastern Kentucky accent. I hate your mom. I hate your father. I hate everything about you for what you are. My family. He was screaming and he was his hand on the table. And he wasn't completely standing up. He was like this. He was sitting, he was the most that much. He was like this. Literally. That's when I knew he was dead. Or close to it, and twitching. And that's it. I let him, I still, even though it hurt, I still never was it. That I couldn't stand to watch him twitch and he was going to die or have a completely deformed face. He's very vain. One of our last conversations we had that was good was that he wants my best friend who's a dentist to do his veneers and wants to get a nose job. Just that kind of person. And I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job. He wanted appropriate. He was twitching. There was his body was twitching, his legs were twitching. He walked around the table. And I think that's when I shot him in the head. I shot him probably 6 times. Shot him in the head. He fell on the ground. He was like laying like this. His glasses were still on. He was twitching some more. I shot him a couple more times just to make sure he was dead. Because I didn't want to watch him die. And it was already done. It was already done. It was already over. And I called him. I said, I killed Ryan. And she said, why? Well, you know, I didn't just kill him. What happened? And I told him the story. I said, well, do I just sit there and please him? And just let them find me? And she said, no, baby. She said, what would happen? And she's like, you know, you shouldn't have done it, but it happened.
All I can say to that is, wow, that was the police interview of Shayna Hubers. Again, she's on trial again for the murder of her boyfriend. You heard there she talked about how she shot him. And the thing that sticks out to me the most is she throws in this little jab about giving him the nose job he always wanted. And I shot him around here. To me, there's something going on up here. If you just killed your boyfriend because you say it was a domestic dispute and he was the primary aggressor and you were in fear for your life, but then you talk about a nose job that he always wanted. I think there's something going on upstairs that's just not quite right. Jennifer, I will toss to you. What do you make of her interview here? And of course, based on the evidence, what she's saying just doesn't add up.
You know, I think she is the star witness for the prosecution, ironically. her and her big mouth and everything she said during this police interview that we know lasted 2 hours and some 40 minutes, I believe. I think that you're exactly right, Vincent. She isn't quite right. And in the defense's opening statements, they said just exactly that. She suffers from a number of problems, including borderline personality disorder. And I think that during their testimony from the experts, we'll hear a lot more about that and how the way she's acting is actually quite fitting for someone who suffers from that type of disorder.
Got it. So, Brad, to that point, why didn't she then at least try to get out of standing trial for the reason of mental illness, right? Incompetent to stand trial.
And that's what I thought when I first heard about this case. And I reviewed the opening statements, and there was no mention of diminished capacity. And we can clearly see why she didn't testify in her first hearing, because she's a horrible witness, and all these statements come in around it. And it's so hard when you try to be objective when you analyze a trial like this, but listening to her testimony, her 911 tape, and this interview just makes it almost impossible to try to be objective and believe she may have had any rational reason behind shooting him 6 times.
Yeah, and to me, I always say it's the evidence that will tell you every story. You can listen to whatever testimony you want. You can listen to anything. You can listen to Jailhouse. You can listen to Old Neighbors. You can listen to all of this stuff. But it's always the evidence. And we heard that testimony from the chief that said the evidence did not suggest what Shayna Huber said happened inside that apartment. We got a lot more to cover on this trial. Trust me, there's so much more interesting testimony coming up on this trial. We'll cover it here on the Law and Crime Network on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Again, we've been covering the Shayna Huber's murder trial. You can see her there on your screen. She is on trial again for the murder of her boyfriend. She shot him 6 times, once in the face. Prior to the break, we heard her police interview from the day of the shooting. She talked about what led to the shooting. Now we want to switch gears and hear her testimony from the stand as she talks about the emotional abuse she sustained. Take a listen.
Did you all continue to see each other after Thanksgiving?
Yes, sir.
And was that continuous, or were there bumps in the... Oh, that's me. Was that continuous, or was that continuous?
I know what you were getting ready to say. There were some bumps in the road, but there was one breakup between Thanksgiving and Christmas that lasted a couple weeks, and then we got back together about a week before Christmas and stayed together until late winter, late winter.
Ms. Hubers, during that late 2011 period, what did you believe that you needed to do to make this relationship continue to work with Mr. Poston?
Ryan always put pressure on me to orgasm. He put pressure on me to get breast implants, and he also put pressure on me to remain a certain size or lose weight. At one point, I lost weight for him, and he told me I was too skinny and to gain weight. He was always very particular about my size and things of that nature. The orgasm thing was the most important, I believe.
Okay, so there's more testimony from Shayna Hubers. And Jennifer, I just got to ask, listen, I've been married twice. I've dated here and there. Listen, if I'm not happy with someone, in the words of Chris Brown, I just throw up the deuces and I leave. So why did she stay in this relationship if she says there was this emotional abuse and he wasn't happy with her body and all of this other stuff?
Right. And of course, the prosecution is arguing that Ryan Poston was trying to break up with her, but she was so obsessed with him that she just refused to leave, and she wouldn't let anyone else have him if she couldn't have him. I think that, why wouldn't she leave? The defense is going to argue that that's the cyclical nature of an abusive relationship, if in fact one does exist. And also going back to that theme of this alleged borderline personality disorder, those folks engage in risky behaviors. They lose touch with reality. So I would expect to hear something along those lines once experts testify on her behalf.
Right. And Brad, speaking of reality, here's my reality. And again, this is just my reality. We heard testimony where she said he wanted her to have breast implants and all of this. We know that the day of the shooting, he was supposedly going on this date with this former beauty pageant contestant. She's a very beautiful young woman. I think in this case there was this thing of jealousy. She didn't think she was good enough for Brad, especially the fact he's dating this lady that used to be Miss Ohio 2012. What say you on this?
I agree. I think when you listen to her testimony, and let's step aside, if what she's saying is true, then her behavior is consistent with being a victim of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. Jennifer was mentioning about why she didn't leave. Unfortunately, many of them don't or can't.
Right.
But again, looking at this witness, listening to her testimony, and again, I try to be objective. I look at her body language. She's smiling a couple times during examination. She's slouched over on the side like it's comfortable and casual. The pictures of her in the courtroom, she's smiling with her hair back. It's just not believable that any of this would have led her to be so fearful for her safety that she would have to shoot him. Plus, we had the testimony of his friends and coworkers that he was trying to get her out of the relationship and get away from her emotionally, and then we have the testimony that he was trying to do it physically in the room.
Yeah, and I think that will be key as this trial moves forward. Let's get back in the courtroom and hear more from Shayna Hebers herself.
How did Mr. Poston treat you when you all were out together?
Ryan and I were both, you wouldn't know it to look at us. We were both thin people, but we both loved to eat. And we went out to eat all the time. Ryan took me out, especially in 2011, to eat often. I can't tell you how many restaurants we went to. And oftentimes in public, sometimes in public he was nice to me, but sometimes when it was just him and I at a restaurant, he would pick on me and belittle me and bully me in front of strangers. And it could be for something as small as how I was eating my food. The way that I chewed my food bothered him. He said I smacked my gums and it embarrassed him. And he would pick on me in front of the other people at the restaurant for smacking my gums. He also would pick on me for anything, just the smallest of things. It would be right in front of people, and sometimes it would get a little loud, and the other customers in the restaurant would look over, and it would just feel very humiliating and degrading.
Okay. Now, you got back together at some point in July, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Do you recall? Do you recall communication from Mr. Ryan about what would be necessary for you to continue to have a relationship with him?
Oh, okay. Well, when we got back together in July of 2012, I felt Ryan put conditions on the relationship. He said he wanted an exclusive relationship, and he labeled that as non-touching of other girls and guys, but that he wanted me to be his incognito girlfriend, and he wanted me to talk 25% less. He always said I talked too much, and he wanted me to get a hobby while I was at his condo, and he also wanted me to agree to have threesomes with other girls.
Did you all communicate about that via text communications?
Yes, sir, and in person.
What else did he want you to do?
He still wanted me to get the G-shot injection, and he wanted me to... Oh, I wasn't allowed to ask him about how his day went. He said I wasn't allowed to ask him about how his day at work went because at the end of the day, he felt like the day was so bad, he used the expression, he literally wanted to put his fist through the wall.
Okay, that was more testimony from Shayna Hubers. That was some pretty interesting testimony, and I don't want to take anything away from what she was saying because there's only two people that know that story. One's not here to tell it. But if what she is saying is true, I can definitely see the emotional abuse here in this case. I still don't see the physical abuse, and I definitely don't see any evidence of that. Jennifer, I will toss to you as you listen to that testimony. Do you think that weighed heavy on the jury, especially if there's female jurors in there, about this emotional abuse?
Well, I still think she has a major hurdle here because she just doesn't seem all that convincing. Yeah, we're hearing all of this testimony about how Ryan controlled what she wore, what she said, how much she talked, how she chewed even. But we've been talking all throughout this broadcast about how she just doesn't seem that credible. It's interesting, she's now getting into these purported sexual problems that the two of them had, and we know that that's a big part of the defense here, that Ryan really had a tremendous amount of anger toward her as a result of these alleged sexual issues that they have.
Yeah, I get that, but why not, I'm not condoning this, why not go out and get another sexual partner? But, we heard testimony that he had tried to break up with her several times. We don't know what was going on in that bedroom, so we definitely don't want to take anything away from that. Again, there's only two people to tell this story, and he's not here to tell it. So, that I still don't think we're quite there to say she was justified in shooting this man 6 times and actually standing over him and firing that gun into him several more times after she had shot him twice. I just don't think we're quite there yet. When we come back, we're actually going to switch gears, get back to the Roy Oliver case, a police officer on trial right now for the murder of a 15-year-old in Texas. Stay tuned right here on the Law&Crime Network.